Good evening. How is everybody doing tonight? I'm so glad you could join in. So, on our last chapter check in, we were on chapter 7, and just want to do a quick little review on what chapter 7 was about because it's very closely related to chapter 8. So, here we go. All right, so the review of chapter 7 says, remember, healthy people who desire healthy relationships don't have an issue with boundaries. And we talk about how there are, most of the times, the people who give the most pushback on a boundary are people who need the boundary the most. So, going on, if our identity, the foundational belief we hold of who we are, is tied to an opinion someone has of us, we need to reassess. Chapter 7, the title of chapter 7 was Just Because They Say It Doesn't Mean That We Have to Own It. And so, not because someone says a particular thing about us or feels a particular way about us means that we have to own somebody else's opinion. Posing a boundary as a question opens us up to be questioned, debated, and disrespected. If presented with doubt, a boundary won't be effectively carried out. And so we talked about having confidence when we are addressing a boundary or when we are setting a boundary. It's my responsibility not to let another person's actions and expectations wear me down to the worst version of myself. We won't get healthy results from unhealthy relationships. We talk about there are some times when relationships just have to be cut off, right? Unfortunately. Okay. Next one. When God is the source of our identity, we are much less prone to others feeding our insecurity. When God is the source of our identity, we are much less prone to others feeding our insecurity. And chapter 7 was real heavy on that part right there, where our identity should be completely, completely wrapped up in God. And I just want to share this experience again that she gave on in chapter 7 with the friend and the baby picture. And at the end of chapter 7, like she gives us a beautiful challenge to take out a younger picture of ourselves, particularly a picture before our hurt start, and speak to that younger self and think about who you were before that hurt and pain, and basically ask God to bring you back to that place where you were just your authentic self in Him without other people's validation, other people's opinion holding so much value over your life. And I think is a beautiful exercise. This keep in mind that this is no professional advice. I'm just reading the book and giving my um, take on what I'm reading and also how it's impacting my life. All right, chapter 8. We are almost there, y'all. We are almost there. Chapter 8. Trying to make someone else happy shouldn't be your definition of healthy. Trying to make someone else happy shouldn't be your definition of healthy. There's a word or terminology for this that I would like to think that it applies to what this chapter's title is, and it's called people pleasing or people pleasers. Now, I'm not talking about, okay, you have your children or there's people in your life. Of course, you want to make them happy. You want to do things that they love to do and do with them. But we're talking about when it completely you have to become something or someone else in order to to make people happy, and we're going to get into it. So chapter 8, she starts the chapter talking about when her children wanted this puppy when they were younger, of course, and living in a home. And she knew that in getting this puppy, they wanted to love and play with, but the heavy responsibility was going to be on her. But she allowed them to talk her into getting this puppy. And exactly what she predicted is what happened. So she ended up with all of the struggles. And of course, it's a puppy. The puppy needed training, and they were crate training. And the puppy would, chew up, gnaw up. And one day a friend came over, and this puppy was just being everything that it was not supposed to be. And she said after she had picked up a torn up toilet paper roll from across the floor, the friend said to her, "Why don't you put him in his crate?" And she said, her reply was, "If I put him in his crate, I can't take the crying." And the friend gave her a piece of wisdom that she got from her mother or grandmother when she had the same situation. And they said, "I'm not happy 100% of the time, so he'll be all right." And so she says, if setting a boundary with, in this case, a pet, a puppy, is important, how much more important is setting boundaries with human beings? And so I'm going to start right on in chapter 8, page 121. And she says, oh, sorry, I'll start from page 120. Defining what is and is not acceptable is even more important with human relationships. If people are constantly annoying us, frustrating us, exhausting us, or running all over us, chances are we either don't have the right kind of people in our life, or we don't have the right kind of boundaries, or maybe it's both. So I want to put a question out to you. It's on the screen. Whether you're live or whether you're watching the replay, put a 1 in the chat if you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube. A 1, I don't have the right kind of people. Number 2, I don't have the right boundaries. Or number 3, both. I don't have the right kind of people. I don't have the right boundaries, or both. Okay. So as I await your responses, or I'll go back and look at your responses, I think there was a season in my life where I would definitely have to say number 1. Now I'm in a season where I think I'm at number 2, and I'm working on setting healthier boundaries. And child, this chapter gets deep, because setting boundaries is not the easiest thing, because boundaries are easily seen as a defense tactic or an avoidance tactic, but it is just what it is. It's setting a boundary, right? Okay, so here we go. Let's continue reading. She says, but make no mistake. Oh, sorry. She says, wait, relief. You might think to yourself, boundaries don't bring relief. They can make the other person angry or disappointed enough in me to say hurtful things about me. I just want to keep the peace. Oh, I have heard that so many times. I want to keep the peace. So I'll go along with their attitudes and behaviors so that I don't have to deal with the fallout of addressing all of this. And that might appear to work for a while, but make no mistake, over time, you will have the equivalent of a living room full of shredded toilet paper and a heart full of simmering resentments. Without stopping the cycle by establishing appropriate boundaries, either there will be an eventual emotional explosion of frustration, which you will later regret, or simmering resentments that will silently eat away inside of you until you truly can't stand the person at all. Or, like she said a few chapters back, you get sick, like you are physically sick, right? I think that was in chapter 5, where she talked about how sick she got. Her intestines were twisted, stomach walls collapsed, breast cancer, double mastectomy. It was a whole thing, right? And so I've heard some terminologies before. You could put in the chat if you've ever heard any of these. One of them, I won't say the word that's usually used, but it says, you'll see when mess hits the fan, right? Or there's another one we use in the Bahamas. I've heard people say they're gonna know just why lobsters turn red. And so it has to do with the fact that like one day the trouble, the mess that the situation is gonna make is gonna be so much more difficult to handle, that it's better to work on solving it right now than just letting it slide. Okay. So this is where our boundaries are important. Sometimes the worst kind of anger and bitterness happens when you feel forced to smile on the outside while you are screaming on the inside. Now, there is a characteristic about me that I've grown to love. I'll be quite honest with you. There was a point in my life where I was worried. I was concerned about myself, right? It's difficult for me to fake a smile. I remember I was fresh out of high school, maybe a year out of high school. I was in college. I did classes in the evening and I worked in the day. And as a teacher's aide at the time, one of our responsibilities was to stand at the door and in the evening times and welcome the parents as they came for their children. Now, of course, I would say, in the Bahamas, like saying good morning, good evening, like that's a big deal, right? And I would say those things. But there were some people who just were, they had done some not so okay things to us in terms, I won't even get too deep into it. But there were some people whose demeanor, I would just simply just say, good morning, good evening, basic good afternoon. And I would, do my diligent duty, go and get their child and make sure that they were packed up, bring them to the door, etc., etc. And I remember one time one of the teacher and another teacher's aide said, because they were watching me, and they were like, "It's something about you, like you can't fake a smile." I was like, "Yep, it's true. Like I just can't. Like if I'm not happy about a situation or all favorable about a particular person, I'm not gonna sit there and force a smile." I got that from my mother. Like it's just difficult to do, and I like the few times that I've tried it, I just don't even feel like my real self. And here she says, the worst kind of anger and bitterness happens when you feel forced to smile on the outside. And if you know closely the people around you, you can see when they're faking it. You can see when they're just trying to, we have another saying, trying to keep a good face. But it doesn't do any justice to yourself, because that means that there is something that needs to be dealt with. So let's deal with the issues. I've been that woman, sometimes losing my temper because I let things go so long. I just couldn't hold back my frustration any longer, or sometimes biting my tongue so long that I lost the desire to stay close to that person. So instead of addressing it, setting boundaries, maybe the dynamics of the relationship changing, but then now she got to the place where she could not even, basically stand the person anymore, right? So here we go. I'm not proud of either of these extremes, and neither of these reactions match who I really am as a person. Truly, that's what hurts. That's what hurts so much as I look back at reactions I regret. I allowed things to get to such a bad place. I couldn't hold on to the real me. And when I lost the real me, I never gained anything good back. Losing my temper never made anything better, and stuffing my frustrations never made the hard stuff go away. I knew I needed boundaries. So why was I letting other people's commentary rattle my identity? In the last chapter, we already worked on answering the question, who am I? But how do we apply all of this in the context of a really challenging dynamic relationship? So now she gives an example based on her own marriage, right? So she says, there are countless married women who have reached out to me brokenhearted and feeling paralyzed because of their husband's struggle with pornography and refusal to get help. So she's not just talking about people who, have a problem, they're willing to acknowledge it and willing to work on it. We're talking about people who have an issue, and let's make it broad to more than just marriage. Just think about any relationship where there's something going on and then there's just a complete refusal to acknowledge it, right? So often the wife tries to draw a boundary by saying she can no longer allow this issue to go unaddressed. She declares that she will be going to a counselor to help her process the trauma this is causing to her heart. If her husband would like to join her and work on a healthy solution, then together they can move toward healing. If her husband refuses, she tells him that in order to pursue healing for herself, she will make some needed changes. So I'm just going to summarize what she says here until she gets to the part that the husband would say. So, she goes and gets her self-help. She gets some counseling. She's working on herself. She's following the process. But now here's where all of this could fall apart. The wife draws, I'm on page 124. The wife draws necessary boundaries and her husband lashes back. We talked in the last few chapters about pushback, right? And we said that normally the people who push back the most on boundaries are the people who need the boundaries the most. It says, so look at some of the things that that person may say. It's no wonder I watch porn. Look at it, what a nag you are. You're so dramatic. This isn't that big of a deal. All men do it. I can't even trust you with my struggles because you're always looking to find something wrong with me. And you think this little boundary tactic is going to make me more attracted to you? No, this just shows me I'm justified because you don't care about my needs. So now she's heartbroken over everything he says. She loves her husband. She's afraid of losing him. She feels so alone. She doesn't feel like she can tell anyone. Now, not only does she have the hurt of his betrayal, but she starts to question if she really is to blame. She wonders, am I trustworthy? Am I overdramatic? Am I so overbearing that I'm the one pushing him to do this? So now his opinion of her has become a part of her identity, when in reality, she is not the problem. So she drops the boundary, trying to prove to him that she is none of those things. And so the real issue goes unaddressed. So I'm going to go through. So after years of unresolved anger, she starts reacting in ways she never thought she would. She makes passive aggressive comments. She gets frantic about knowing where her husband is and what he's doing at all times. She feels so afraid of what he might be doing on the computer and his phone. She tries to control him. So basically, she becomes everything or the very thing that she was trying to prove that she isn't. All because she did not hold on to the boundary that she had set and continued the process of healing for herself. Let me just put this plug in here. Her going through the process of healing was not going to change him or what he did. That is something, or let's look at any relationship generally, what the other person is going to do. That process is for me. That process is for you. That is to protect you so that as these things are going on around us and we set a boundary, we know that there's going to be pushback. So we know how to respond. We know how to hold our ground with the help of a professional therapist, of course, prayer, with the help of a trusted friend, mentor, whomever it is, right? So this woman is kind, loyal, responsible, and generous. The only fighting chance she has of keeping the best of who she is front and center in her daily life is by remembering that boundaries aren't shoving him away. They are helping hold herself together. At the core of what's tearing apart her marriage isn't her need for a boundary, but rather his inappropriate and unbiblical choices. But here she is internalizing it and taking it on herself. So if you're reading this and are in a similar situation in which another person's behavior is deeply impacting you, I understand. I relate to the excruciating angst of what deceptions and all kinds of heartbreak do to a wife who wants nothing more than to be fully chosen, purely loved, and honorably protected in the marriage relationship. This is where she allows herself to be the most open and vulnerable. So this is where she experiences the deepest hurt. I have sat with many women who have experienced betrayal I've wept with you. I've felt bewildered for you. I've cried out to God with you, asking for the madness to stop. I've wondered with you why this happens. I've processed with you how we can forgive and move forward. And I've wept with you some more. And certainly there are husbands who know this same heartbreak and betrayal as well. When one spouse starts keeping secrets from the other to cover up and continue in hurtful patterns, instead of loving their spouse and family, they give the best of themselves to invest in inappropriate relationships. This is some of the deepest pain a human soul will ever know. All right, so I'm going to just skip through a bit. Watching another person tear apart a life you love hits us in waves of grief. And it's this grief over what we fear we will lose that makes us scared to draw boundaries. I'm going to say that again, and I'll highlight this part right here because basically the last two chapters have hit on this so heavily. If it would just highlight for me, right? Okay, I think like my computer skipped and went back to a whole other chapter. All right, so I'm going to continue. I'm going to go back to where I was. So, okay, and it's this grief over what we fear we will lose that makes us scared to draw boundaries. And it's this grief over what we fear we will lose. Chapter 6, we talked about maybe losing a person's financial support, losing a friendship, losing a relationship with a parent or a child or a sibling, or maybe just the dynamics of the relationship changing, the fear of what we will lose, maybe losing a particular status in church or community or school. So, because of what we fear that we are going to lose, we are scared to draw boundaries. Oh my goodness. If I were to just list, starting from my life, the many times like I've done this, and even now as an adult, and as I go through this journey, and I just write how I see this play out around me, I am certain that I will be writing from now nonstop until probably the end of the year, because I just see in so many circumstances where we are just afraid of not being liked. We are afraid of people maybe talking bad about us. But I've come to the realization that people are going to be who they are. We are all going to be who we are. And so if someone is not going to like you because you choose to be yourself, that is okay. I shared with someone a couple months ago, like there was this person who was just actually getting at their business. And it was really bothering this person. Like they were really upset because they've never had a bad review. And this one person was just like a thorn in the flesh. And God gave me something to say to them that really was for myself. And I said to them, there are over 8 billion people in the world. Why are you stressing about this one person? And immediately when I said it, the person was like, wow. And I said the same thing to myself, like, geez, where did that come from? Right? Because it's all a tactic from Satan to get us distracted, to get us living in fear. They're gonna like you if they're gonna like you, and they're not gonna like you if they're not gonna like you. Chances are they are taking advantage of the fact that they know that you need to set a boundary, or they know that there are things about them or the way that they do that you don't particularly like, but you're just going along with it. And so they're going to just continue to take advantage of that. So be yourself one time, and who is for you will be for you. It's just a bit of encouragement. I'm going to read on. We feel deeply, so we hurt immensely. I'm on page 125. Our mind and pulse are constantly racing from triggers and fears and worst case scenarios. Oh, yes. And though we aren't normally wired for retaliation, sometimes it just feels good to get down in the mud and sling it back on the one hurting us so much. That's when we must say, This person has already devastated us, and we will not allow the situation to draw us into making choices to retaliate that add the weight of our own regrets on top of all the other pain. So, how do we keep ourselves together day after day when someone seems to be working overtime to tear us apart? Again, this is why we must draw boundaries, get help from others, and use our voice to say, this particular thing is not acceptable, and I will work to keep myself safe and healthy no matter what my spouse chooses from now on. We could change spouse to any particular relationship that we need to set boundaries in. Certainly, drawing boundaries in a marriage where infidelity and other traumatic issues are happening apply to some of us, but not all of us. Regardless, we must not draw appropriate boundaries. Sorry, let me read that properly. Regardless, we all must not just draw appropriate boundaries, but also guard our true identity. Here is where it touches all of us, married or not. There will often be everyday scenarios that might make us question who we are based on another person's actions or reactions. For example, a close friend not inviting you to be a bridesmaid in her wedding. Then suddenly you are questioning whether she really viewed you as a friend. Listen, if as I read these, if you have ever experienced any of these feelings, please put a 1 in the chat. So that was the first one. Here's the next one. Messing something up at work and your boss telling you that you must pay closer attention to detail. That could be, let's just change that from boss and say a parent, say a sibling, like a friend ask you to do something, you didn't do it, quite right, and then now, they make a comment and now you're questioning your capabilities. Put a 1 in the chat if you've ever experienced that. If you want to share your experience in the chat, go right ahead. I'm gonna go to the next one. Well, one after the next. A parent expressing their disappointment in you for deciding not to travel to their house several hours away for Thanksgiving this year, and you question if this means you're really a terrible daughter. And things like this do happen, right? If you personalize an incident by attaching it to your identity, you will bear the weight of it like an unremovable scarlet letter. If you personalize an incident, I saw something the other day. The quote just said, "It's not always about you." And I am still learning this. God has made me aware of it. Let me say that. And so now I am more aware of when I'm making something about me. It's not always about us. It's just not. Like, I could just be having a bad day and not maybe acknowledge the person, just using as an example, in the way that I probably normally did. Right? That doesn't mean that that person needs to take that, personalize it. Oh, if you've changed, so on and so forth. Ain't got nothing to do with you. That close friend not asking you to be a bridesmaid, it may have nothing to do with the fact that she never viewed you as a friend. You don't know her reasons why. Now, if she says to you, well, I don't see you as a friend, such and such, well, that's different. But maybe she has a sister or maybe a childhood friend that she envisioned. And this is where in relationships, open communication is important, right? Because sometimes we personalize things and it wasn't even like that. Now, we're not talking about a consistent, intentional ill behavior towards us. We're talking about these everyday scenarios, like she said, that we just take it and it completely derails our day, derails our week, and then we get in our feelings, like people say, and it's just not necessary, right? It just takes up too much energy. All right. If you don't personalize it, but rather see the situation as a moment to pause and consider, you'll be better able to humbly determine what to do and how to process it. Exactly. Maybe this is an opportunity to ask yourself, is this something that is supposed to reform me or inform me? Oh my goodness. Now, I had not read that. And I think in the last chapter, the chapter before, God had revealed something to me. Stop taking things as insult and take it as insight. So it came to me as clear as day: insult versus insight. There are times when God is just showing us something. But we go and we take it as an insult. We get in our feelings. And once we do that, we react in a way that I said to someone, I said, our angels must be looking at us like, why don't you just be quiet and just observe? Right? Because if we take a step back, is this informing me maybe of what the relationship that this friend and I really have? Did I ignore things along the way that maybe I was the one always making the phone calls and inviting out to lunch dates and extending the arm? Was she ever really doing that to me? Now I've not chosen to be a bridesmaid and I'm in my feelings, right? Or it could be to reform me. Why am I taking this so personal? She's always been a good friend to me. She's never given me a reason to doubt our friendship. So that may be reform, or it could be to inform. If some part of this situation helps develop you in healthy ways, receive it as a growth opportunity. Okay, I see someone had messaged earlier and said both. I'm sorry, I'm just seeing it. But when we were talking about the types of, is it that we don't have the right people in our life, or we don't have the right boundaries, or both? Yep. And this, I think this entire book is going to help us sort through who are the right kind of people and who are not. I just want to say this as I go back to the reading, and I want to skip through some of the reading, but I just want to put this out there. This is my personal experience. You can put in the chat if this is what you're realizing or you have realized in your life. There seems to be, correct me if I'm wrong, like if you have a different culture or you're in a different place and you see different, please let me know. It could just be me. But I feel like within the Christian community in particular, there is this unspoken belief that we are supposed to just be friends with everyone and we're just supposed to smile with everyone. And of course, we are supposed to love everyone, because by loving everyone, I always have good intentions towards you. The truth of the matter is, not everyone is for us. Not everyone is supposed to be a close friend. I had to learn this the hard way. Not the hardest way, but a hard way. And as I realized that, then that obligation, like this chapter is talking about, like trying to make someone else happy shouldn't be a definition of healthy. That's what the very chapter is. When I came to that realization that Jesus does not require of me to be everybody's friend, it was like it was like a physical weight loss in my mind, if that makes sense, right? Because when we let go of these delusions and these unbiblical mindsets that have been passed on to us, that have kept us trapped, that have kept us in relationships with people who are abusing us to the point where we don't even realize we're being abused, then it's not until then we can be truly free. Jesus said, you should know the truth and the truth should set you free, right? And so when I could, because here's the truth of the matter. When we start to set boundaries, there are going to be some people who cannot handle our boundaries. When we say to someone, no, I'm not able to do this particular thing for you anymore, then we see why they were really there in the first place. It is okay if they choose to walk away. It's okay. It's not your responsibility to try to go and run and fix something, because God has informed you of why they were really there in the first place. If you could relate to that, please put a 1 in the chat. And I feel like so many of us have been burdened by this trying to hold on to everybody. Please do not continue to live with that. Pray about it. Ask God to show us who are the right people in our lives. Okay, I'm going to move on. If a person's actions aren't helpful but instead hurtful of their requests, unrealistic, let this inform your response. Discern. Do I need to talk to them about this? Do I need to establish healthy expectations? Do we need to agree to disagree? It's okay to disagree. Do I need a boundary here? Let's take that last example about Thanksgiving travel and apply some wisdom to it. Consider if this is a potential opportunity to be reformed. If your parent is your parent, sorry, disappointed because you really have neglected the relationship? Are you not going to see them out of retaliation or unkindness? Did you commit to go and then another opportunity arose that seemed more fun? Maybe your mom or dad being upset is legitimate and you reconsider your decision. If not, then consider how this might inform you. So the reform comes when our intentions were not in the right place. And we got to check ourselves. That's really what the reform is. But now, let's say it's informing you. Your parents' disappointment may be a sign that they are having a hard time with tradition shifting. Ooh. And maybe you just need to invite them to come to your house. You aren't rejecting them, and you are being realistic about your own family's desire to not spend so much time on the highway. You aren't being unkind. You are being wise about recognizing your own family's need to be together at your home and establish your own new traditions. And I could put a plug right there. Like for the last few years, that's what I've really been doing. Like I've been more to myself, working on myself, just trying to figure out like I know who I am, but where do I fit in and where I am and everything else that comes along with it? Where do my gifts fit in? All of that. And I've seen where that has become a point of offense for some people when it's really not. It's really just me checking myself and getting me together, right? But like we said earlier, not everybody can handle the changes that's happening in your life, right? Or maybe your parents' disappointment is informing you of some deeper issues and healthy tendencies that need to be addressed, and setting boundaries would help. Regardless, here's what we shouldn't do: attach their disappointment to our identity. So, like she said, when someone, like, you start to think of yourself as a not so good son or daughter because your parents feel this way. So, First Peter 2, verse 23. When they hurled their insults at him, talking about Jesus, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. He knew why he was here. He had his purpose, and he was unfazed by the rest of it. I don't have all the answers, not for the everyday relational hardships and hurdles, not for the woman whose husband is refusing to acknowledge porn as a serious problem that's tearing apart his wife and his marriage, not for all the other kinds of devastations many have endured, not for why any of this happens and when it will ever stop. Some of this is all just horribly crappy and uber complicated. But here is one answer I do have. Other people don't get the final say about who we are. Praise the Lord. God does. Therefore, what makes it possible to not fall apart into a fractured and frail shadow version of the woman we are meant to be is this: we must place a boundary around our identity, protecting it and guarding it, using God's truth to inform and stabilize what we know, what we feel, and what we do. So I'm just gonna excuse me, skim through these a bit. Staying whole. We can't control what others believe. We can't control what others feel. We can't control what others do, but we can control and be responsible for ourselves. And we've discussed before, boundaries aren't meant to control another person. Boundaries make it possible for us to hold ourselves together, right? So in the last chapter, we discussed the basics of who I am. And like I said, she gave a challenge to write down who I am before the hurt and the pain, who I am before I needed other people's opinion or validation, right? So she talks about these three terms: orthodoxy, what we know, and the correct doctrine. So, the scripture that's used is James 3, verse 17 to 18. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Remember, we talk about the right intentions. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. So, orthodoxy is what we know. Orthopathy, what we feel, correct emotions. So in Ecclesiastes, it says, it's a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Orthopraxy, what we do, correct living. So he has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. So when all three of these are in alignment with who God intends me to be, that's wholeness. I love it. So what I know, what I feel, and what I do, when they are all lined up with who God intended me to be, that is wholeness. That right there is a whole word all by itself. A fractured human being is one who has disconnected some part of their thinking or feeling or doing from who they are. So every time you have to fake that smile, that's you're taking something apart from who you are. Every time you have to say that thing or you think that thing and it makes you feel so bad inside, but you're not addressing it, you are taking some part away from you of who God has called you to be, who you are supposed to be. So, what does this all have to do with boundaries? Boundaries remind us of the right definition of healthy. Number two, boundaries protect us from fractured people fracturing us. Boundaries protect us from fractured people fracturing us. And I think the part here that gets me, I think, is when it's the people closest to us. Let's go back to the example of the parents, right? So let's say that the parents have some emotional issues that they need to deal with, right? Um, so the truth of the matter is they are humans just like us, and they may be broken. They may not have the emotional capacity to realize that my child has their own family. They may not be able to come all the way out here. It may be too expensive, such and such. It all depends on the circumstance. And so they are fractured just as we are. And so in the boundary now says, hold on, I cannot completely derail myself and my family to accommodate. Yes, even though it's my parents and I love them, but I have to evaluate who is going to come first in this situation. And so boundaries protect us from fractured people fracturing us. So I am going to go to the conclusion. There's so much more, of course. So I'm just going to go to the conclusion. Oh, no, I'm going to go to this one of the scriptures and then I'll conclude. So she uses this scripture here from Paul in Colossians chapter 3, verse 12 and 16. Talks about putting on and putting off, right? So in Colossians chapter 3, Paul's language of putting on and putting off speaks to this ancient context. If you and I say we have an allegiance to Jesus, but then put on clothes of defeat, which are things like anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language, and lying, this actually points to a false allegiance. Instead, Paul tells us to put on our victory clothes given to us by Jesus: compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, forgiveness, love, unity, peace, thankfulness, wisdom, and gratitude. These qualities give the world evidence of our faithful allegiance to our victorious King. So, when you answer the question, who am I? Colossians chapter 3 is a great place to start. And please note these qualities mentioned by Paul are not an exclusive list. Throughout the Bible, you can find many other God-honoring qualities to help you put a stake in the ground and declare your allegiance to Jesus, not the ever-changing opinions of others, right? So let's go to the prayer for this chapter. It says, Father God, as I think about the truthful words I've just read, my heart is comforted by the fact that nothing and no one other than you defines me. Who I am is held completely in the protection of what you have done for me. Help me make choices that stay in line with your truth. As I process words spoken to me or over me by others, help me untangle any pieces of unforgiveness, bitterness, or resentment that I may need to bring to you. Thank you for making a way for me to live the healthiest life I possibly can, so that your light shines even brighter through me for others to see. In Jesus' name, amen. That was an absolutely beautiful chapter. a lot to reflect on, a lot to meditate on. And so I hope that you were blessed by it, whether you're on live or you're watching the replay. And so I will see you next week for chapter 9. Let me just give you a heads up. Chapter 9 says, what am I so afraid of? We're getting deeper. We're getting deeper into evaluating ourselves. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. Love you all, and let us heal and grow together as we set healthy boundaries.